My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to 106.7, Wilmington's Big Talker. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, castle doctrine and stand your ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. You've undoubtedly heard what purports to be an ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. Well, we seem to be particularly cursed because the times are interesting indeed. The president we elected is under attack from the left in what can only be described as a coup d'etat. Traditional American holidays are under attack from the left. Traditional American values are under attack from the left. And the right to keep and bear arms is under attack from the left. Every Democrat presidential candidate supports some level of what can only be called socialism. And, of course, those same presidential candidates universally support restricting private ownership of firearms. Undoubtedly, that is not a coincidence. California, New York, New Jersey. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Those states are gun control bastions because they are little people's republics. So let me bring it closer to home, Virginia. As you are undoubtedly aware, and as we will update you later in the show, the individual right to keep and bear arms is under unprecedented assault in a state which has traditionally been friendly to the Second Amendment. Virginia now joins other states which once enjoyed gun-friendly environments which are now under attack, states like Washington, Oregon, Nevada, in California, and possibly soon North Carolina. Translated, leftism is spreading, and with it, the civilian disarmament with its attendant loss of individualism that socialists need to foment their agenda. And yes, that means right here in North Carolina, where Eric Holder, Barack Obama, and the forces of leftism plan to repeat here in the 2020 elections exactly what they did in Virginia. This show should scare the crap out of you. Why? Because today on Guns, Politics, and Freedom, we're going to take a glimpse into the mind of the hardcore leftists behind the opposite side of what is fast becoming a cultural civil war. And a sobering glimpse it is, since at least some of the estimated 8% of the population comprising the hard left wants not only to destroy American culture, they want you dead. But first, this just in gun rights news. As the leading state for new restrictions on gun ownership, California is a living laboratory for gun control. So I read with great interest a new study on, among other things, the impact of so-called universal background checks, aka universal gun registration, on gun purchases in California. Entitled California's Comprehensive Background Check and Misdemeanor Violence Prohibition Policies and Firearm Mortality, the paper was published in the Annals of Epidemiology, Volume 30, February 2020. Said the study, quote, in 1991, California implemented a law that mandated a background check for all firearm purchases with limited exceptions, Comprehensive Background Check, or CBC policy is what that's called, and prohibited firearm purchase and possession for persons convicted within the past 10 years of certain violent crimes classified as misdemeanors. They call that the MVP policy. We evaluated the population effect of the simultaneous implementation of CBC and MVP policies in California on firearm homicide and suicide. Its results state, and I quote, the simultaneous implementation of CBC and MVP policies was not associated with a net change in the firearm homicide rate over the ensuing 10 years in Virginia. The decrease in firearm suicides in California was similar to the decrease in non-firearm suicides in that state. In other words, these background check laws have no effect yet again. File that under proof of things you already knew. But let's keep talking about California, since, as you will see shortly, California is the model for the country, according to at least one presidential candidate. That would be the California which is apparently clueless about what motivates human beings. Take, for example, an article in the blog Hot Air entitled "California Shocked to Find Bill Decriminalizing Retail Theft Resulted in More Retail Theft." In 2014, California passed Prop 47, which carried the disingenuous name of the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, and had as its stated purpose to keep nonviolent offenders out of jail. To achieve that goal, it decriminalized a number of lesser offenses, including retail theft. Well, surprise, surprise. Guess what happened? Yeah, you know what happened. Because it's a no-brainer, at least unless you're a Democrat. The good news, if it can be called that, is that arrest rates are down. Yay. The bad news is that retail crime is skyrocketing. According to CBS Sacramento, which studied one town, Vacaville, since 2014, police records show that the annual loss to retail theft in Vacaville has more than doubled. Records show reports of organized retail theft in Vacaville. Crimes with multiple suspects are up 40% this year, this year compared to before Prop 47. And these aren't just shoplifting incidents; these are multi-perpetrator smash and grabs, really. Meanwhile, California presents an immigration problem. No, I don't mean illegal immigration into California, although there's plenty of that. I mean immigration from California. Texas, Arizona, and Colorado are reportedly the predominant destinations for Californians fleeing the state. And according to census estimates reported by Fox News, California may lose a congressional seat. That's the good news. The bad, of course, is that Californians, having already ruined Washington and Oregon, are now invading and polluting conservative states like Texas. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I quote, "While the rest of the country experienced a combined decrease in homelessness in 2019, significant increases in chronic homelessness on the West Coast, particularly California and Oregon, offset those nationwide decreases, causing an overall increase in homelessness of 2.7% in 2019. Homelessness increased in California by 21,306 people, or 16.4%, accounting for more than the entire national increase. In 2019, California's homeless population was 151,278 people. Yet, with housing costs soaring, taxes through the roof, a deteriorating power grid, and scores of homeless defecating in the streets, the left still doesn't understand that their great socialist experiment is fast going the way of Venezuela. During the last year's North Carolina special congressional election, our GRNC's Facebook page picked up a troll from San Francisco, Amy or Ami. I can't really understand how she pronounces her name, since the leftists insist on spelling everything differently than the unwashed like you and me. But anyways, she called San Francisco the Great Progressive Paradise. But it isn't just the internet trolls who are clueless, so are Democratic presidential candidates. This from the Associated Press. Michael Bloomberg, plan for California, export it. The Democratic presidential candidate and former New York City mayor likes a lot of what he sees in the Golden State and thinks its efforts on climate change, gun control, and criminal justice reform set a benchmark for other states. I think that California can serve as a great example for the rest of the country, Bloomberg told supporters. Yes, there are problems, including homelessness, struggling parks, schools, and scarce, costly housing. But California, quote, is something the rest of the country looks up to. California has been a leader in an awful lot of things. You can't make this stuff up. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. After a short break, we will return with the escalating gun battle in Virginia and what the left has in mind for you. My name is Paul Vlone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Few gun control proposals have as much potential for abuse as red flag gun confiscation laws. These laws allow family members, law enforcement, friends, acquaintances, and in some cases even neighbors and coworkers to get an order declaring you dangerous and enabling police to confiscate your guns. Worse, these extreme risk protection orders are generally issued in ex parte or emergency hearings in which the accused might not even know the hearing is taking place, much less get a chance to defend himself in court. Indeed, it is entirely plausible that the first time you know a gun confiscation order has been issued against you is when police show up at your door. Such was the case of Gary Willis of Ferndale, Maryland, who answered the banging on his front door at 5:17 a.m., only to find the police serving an order which had been taken out against him by a family member with a grudge. In the ensuing confrontation, Willis ended up shot dead by police. I call this death by red flag law, and for some time now, I've been saying it wouldn't be the last. Confiscating guns without allowing the accused to defend himself in court clearly represents lack of adequate due process of law under the Fifth Amendment. As I noted earlier this week to a reporter, I defy you to find any other fundamental civil right, and as affirmed by the Supreme Court, the right to keep and bear arms is indeed a fundamental civil right. I defy you to find another fundamental civil right which is routinely suspended without adequate due process of law. Well, last week, I discovered a brand new means of abusing gun confiscation orders. Get this one. A gun confiscation order issued against a cop for lawfully doing his job. In 2017, a Colorado State University police officer, Corporal Phil Morris, encountered a 19-year-old Jeremy Holmes acting erratically with a large hunting knife. Morris asked Holmes to drop the knife 36 times in a 2-minute body cam video. To avoid shooting Holmes, Morris backed up at least 100 feet as the knife-wielding attacker advanced. In an apparent case of suicide by cop, Holmes repeatedly told the police officer to shoot him. When Morris stated that he was, quote, going to taser as a non-lethal means of subduing the attacker, Holmes charged Morris with the knife, forcing the officer to fatally shoot him. District Attorney Clifford Rydell found the shooting to be, and I quote, clearly justified. A clearly justified use of deadly force. End of story. Right? Wrong. On January 9th of this year in Larimer County, Susan Holmes, mother of the deceased, filed an extreme risk protection order against Morris under the new Colorado law which took effect on January 1st. Under Colorado's red flag law, one of the parameters for filing for an order is that the accused and the accuser have a, quote, child in common. Susan Holmes pointed out that nothing in the law requires it to be a biological child in common. In fact, that would probably be impossible in order to include domestic violence against stepchildren. On the form, Holmes alleged that Morris presented a, quote, credible threat of or the unlawful reckless use of a firearm. She further alleged that Morris, quote, Phil Morris used a firearm to recklessly and violently threaten and kill a 19-year-old Jeremy Holmes. Never mind that little knife. Understand that Susan Holmes is clearly both obsessed and irrational. Since the incident, she has filed a civil lawsuit against Colorado State University, claiming lack of transparency surrounding the details of her son's death. She's run for city council, and she has campaigns endlessly to change police practices that she believes led to the incident. So that ERPO is her latest ploy. But it gets better. She didn't just seek a temporary restraining order. Nope. She went for a permanent ERPO, which would require Morris to relinquish guns for 364 days and would be endlessly renewable each year if Holmes continued to complain. Fortunately, in this case, unlike many others, Judge Stephen Howard applied some common sense in ruling against Holmes. But before you say, of course he did, understand that this was not a slam dunk. He ruled only that Holmes didn't have standing because she failed to prove she has a child in common with the cop. And she failed to prove that only because she refused to testify during the hearing, claiming that the judge was biased against her in a previous case. As I said, it's fortunate the judge had sense rather than being an anti-gun judicial activist. And it is fortunate that the order was levied against a cop. If you or I had been forced to shoot Holmes, we likely wouldn't have been so lucky. Notwithstanding the week of anguish it probably caused Morris, the accused, had this been you or I, would have also had to cough up tens of thousands in legal fees. So what do we learn from all this? Well, for starters, we see a demonstration that people with grudges do indeed file ERPOs without good cause. In testifying before Congress, David Kopel of the Independence Institute noted that in Connecticut, which has the longest history with ERPOs, fully one-third of orders issued are eventually reversed. That means one-third of those who are served orders had to go through the anguish and expense of proving that the orders were fraudulently issued. And by the way, that number is probably low since many people probably don't have the money or knowledge to fight the orders, and judges are predisposed to issue and continue orders just to be on the safe side. We also learn that just about anybody can file for an ERPO for just about any reason. I would posit that had it not been filed against a cop in this case, it would have been approved by the court. To find out what to do if you are on the receiving end of one of these orders, go to redflagresourcecenter.com. That's redflagresourcecenter.com. Our next story hails from New Zealand, but you need to hear about it because it demonstrates exactly what gun ban advocates have in mind for you right here. It comes from rightminds.com and is entitled, quote, My house was raided over a 22 long rifle lever action rifle. As you may recall, after the Christchurch killings, New Zealand wasted little time in banning a wide variety of guns, including, but not necessarily limited to, those nasty old semi-automatic firearms. A gun buyback began in January, but relatively few gun owners turned in their weapons. Given the generally non-confrontational nature of the Kiwis, the low rate of compliance in New Zealand bodes ill for the gun bans in Virginia and elsewhere in the United States. Among the many vocal opponents for the ban, one gent, who remains nameless, professes that he happened to mention on the internet that he owned a .22 caliber lever-action rifle which would be banned under the so-called assault weapon ban. Says the victim of the abuse, and I quote, On Thursday evening I was just finishing dinner with my two oldest kids. My wife was feeling unwell and feeding our 4-week-old baby in bed. I had just gotten the ice cream out for our kids when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see a number of police officers outside. They served me a search warrant under Section 6 of the Search and Surveillance Act of 2012. Half a dozen armed police officers swarmed in the front door, as several more ran around the sides of the house. They later called for more backup. Everyone on the property was detained, read their rights, and questioned separately. I opted to call a lawyer who advised me to refuse to answer questions. The warrant claimed they had reason to believe I was in possession of a prohibited magazine fitted to a, quote, .22 long rifle, lever-action rifle, blued metal, brown wooden stock. The officer told me I had posted about it online, which I had in my public written submission against the Firearms Amendment Act passed last year. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. I had used the firearm as an example to prove the legislation was not targeting military-style assault weapons, as the Prime Minister and her cabinet repeated ad nauseum. The vast majority of firearms affected by the legislation were just like mine. This demonstrates a number of abuses we either see in the U.S. or could see. First, the banning of firearms of guns which do not remotely fit the definition of semi-automatic firearms, which happen to look like military rifles. Second, the abuse of the internet, searching what you happen to say for something that could pass as probable cause to search your home. And finally, the door-to-door confiscation of guns. As much as we are called paranoid for expressing the possibility here, please recall that it has been called for by at least 2 presidential candidates. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. After our break, we will return with the latest on the escalating battle over gun rights in Virginia and a glimpse into the mind of leftists and what they have in mind. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. As you have no doubt heard, the battle of our lives is going on right now in Virginia and threatening to spread to our own state. In November, Democrats seized control of both chambers of the Virginia legislature, giving them complete control of the state. The ones who engineered the rout of conservatives were essentially Michael Bloomberg, Barack Obama, and former Attorney General Eric Holder. And now, Democrat Governor Ralph Blackface Northam is planning a host of gun bans, which, legislatively speaking, cannot be stopped. By all accounts, these proposals include, for starters, universal background checks, aka universal gun registration, banning semi-autos and standard capacity magazines, 1 gun a month rationing, and red flag gun confiscation. As the battle continues to escalate, 126 Virginia counties, cities, and towns passed Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. One Virginia sheriff has promised to deputize thousands of people to protect their rights. The Virginia Attorney General has promised to prosecute law enforcement officers who refuse to enforce whatever bans the legislature passes. And U.S. House Democrat Representative Donald McAkin recently floated the idea that Northam could direct the state's National Guard to help enforce the proposed gun restrictions. McAkin also suggested cutting off state funds to counties that don't comply with gun control measures that might pass in the state. Sue till they're blue. That is the strategy being employed by none other than Eric Holder of Fast and Furious infamy, first in Virginia and then right here in North Carolina. Holder and his National Redistricting Action Fund are suing over political districts, claiming they were unfairly drawn to favor one party. In actuality, the practice of the party in power drawing political districts to favor itself dates back to the dawn of our republic, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly refused to stop the practice. Now, why should you, as a gun rights supporter, care? Because whoever draws the districts gets to determine what gun laws will or will not pass for the next 10 years. And of course, Holder and company are suing only in states controlled by Republicans. To them, gerrymandering in Democrat-controlled states is perfectly acceptable. The result has been a perfect storm in Virginia, where Holder changed the districts to favor Democrats, Bloomberg injected out-of-state gun control millions into local races. I say that again, local races, not just the big ones. And the NRA has been largely absent because it has been consumed with its internal power struggles. In response, Virginia Citizens Defense League, or VCDL, is planning a lobby day for tomorrow, January 20th, in Richmond. Although VCDL holds a lobby day at the beginning of every legislative session, this one promises to be something special. With buses coming in from a huge array of places, including plenty from out of state, some have theorized that as many as 120,000 people might attend. But Northam and the Democrats aren't sitting around waiting for that to happen. And as a result, things are escalating. First, the Democrats are fast-tracking gun bills. Even though an earlier rally, apparently organized by the NRA last week on the 13th, turned out hundreds of gun voters on the opening day of the Virginia legislature, according to the Epoch Times, the Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee passed legislation for universal background checks, a measure allowing localities to ban weapons from some events and government buildings, a red flag gun confiscation bill, and a law that limits the purchase of handguns to only one per month. Interestingly, opposition from the thousands of gun owners who have crowded county commission meetings to pass the Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions might be having an impact. The proposed measure, SB 16, that sparked the most controversy, banning the sale and possession of so-called assault weapons, was taken off the table, at least for now. But things just got even more interesting when Northam declared a state of emergency and banned lobby day attendees from carrying firearms and other weapons on Capitol grounds, citing the fact that law enforcement was ill-prepared to deal with ill-prepared to deal with it at the rally in Charlottesville more than 2 years ago. According to Fox News, quote, Northam said at a press conference Wednesday that the decision is based on credible intelligence from mainstream channels, both offline and online, such as the alternative dark web channels used by violent groups and white nationalists from outside Virginia, which law enforcement says have malicious plans that include storming the state capitol building and stirring up violence at Monday's rally. This includes out-of-state militia groups and hate groups planning to travel from across the country to disrupt our democratic process with acts of violence, Northam said. And, quote, they're not coming to peacefully protest, they're coming to intimidate and cause harm. Northam stressed that the threats and violent rhetoric bear resemblance to those seen prior to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville that left one dead and dozens more injured in 2017. Well, meanwhile, paranoia is running rampant. When legitimate gun ban threats are on the legislative horizon, conspiracy theorists come out of the woodwork. Take it from me, I've been doing this for 26 years now. This time, I'm hearing it all, often from people who should know better. That the event, for example, will be used to photograph and track attendees. That Northam apparently plans to create another Charlottesville in order to discredit gun rights supporters and clear a path for gun control. Slightly more credible are predictions that despite the best efforts of VCDL, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and their ilk will show up to create unrest. Or that Antifa will show up with clubs to start violence maybe at buses or elsewhere. Now, I got involved in the gun rights movement back in the dark days of the mid-1990s when legitimate threats included the Brady Act, the semi-auto ban and magazine ban, both of those passed, a proposed bill that was particularly draconian called Brady II, which Handgun Control unveiled by nakedly admitting that the Brady Act was the, quote, nose of the camel under the tent, further saying, here's the rest of the camel. By the way, Brady 2 would have included a need for arsenal licenses if you owned more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition or certain firearms. It included a ban on compact handguns called Saturday Night Specials and a variety of other nasty little pieces of gun control. Then we had Daniel Patrick Moynihan's 10,000% ammunition tax, bans on the Saturday Night Specials, much more. But also floating around were dire predictions of a constitutional convention to not only repeal the Second Amendment, but to further curtail rights in the interest of turning the U.S. into a police state. We had claims that the Council on Foreign Relations was colluding with the UN to take over the country. All sorts of pretty out there stuff. So in dangerous times, I urge you to regard such theories with a skeptical eye, and to confirm, please confirm things before you forward them. As for the Virginia rally, I can't tell you for sure that it won't get ugly. Knowing Phil Van Cleve, the president of VCDL, and his organization, I suspect they are planning for all foreseen contingencies. But with 100,000 plus people attending, you can never know for sure. But one thing I can tell you for sure is that if you stay home, Virginia will shove gun control down our throats. And, this is speaking to North Carolinians now, I can predict with certainty that if the Democrats successfully ban guns in Virginia, particularly if gun owners don't stand up for their rights, they will be emboldened enough to import their plans right here in North Carolina. So don't get scared into staying home. Go to the Virginia rally tomorrow on January 20th. For information, check vcdl.org. That's vcdl.org. vcdl.org. Right now, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we will take a glimpse into the very scary mind of the extreme left. What they have in mind for you, and it looks a lot like the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. After a short break, we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Last week, one of my GRNC volunteers forwarded me an interesting study entitled Hidden Tribes, America's Polarized Political Landscape, which hails from an organization calling itself More in Common, which claims a goal of, quote, uniting divided societies. Can't fault the goal. American society is certainly divided. On one level, the report does what mediocre research often does, namely to prove the obvious, albeit with slightly greater nuance. And amusingly, the paper claims, quote, our research uncovered a different story, one that probes underneath the issues that polarize Americans and finds 7 groups that are defined by their core beliefs rather than their political opinions or by their race, class, or gender. Rather than by their political opinions. And it goes on to categorize people by their political opinions. Core belief versus political opinion strikes me as a distinction without a difference. Rather than simply left or right, the study divides America into 7 tribes, ranging from progressive activist, I love that word, on the left side of the spectrum to devoted conservative on the right. I would argue that there is nothing progressive about the hard left, but we'll save that for later. The paper goes on to profile each of the 7 tribes in terms of beliefs in common issues, such as immigration, sexual harassment, what it calls Islamophobia, a term which itself denotes bias in the study, and of course, white privilege. Among issues include, other issues include Donald Trump, DACA, feminism, and police brutality. One thing I would question is how the tribes were classified, given that they identified what they call passive liberals, but not passive conservatives, instead calling the group moderate. The net effect is to create a false impression of more liberals and fewer conservatives. Ironically, on the same day my volunteer forwarded the study, I encountered an Epoch Times article entitled, quote, Sanders Field Organizer Advocates Violent Revolution, Gulags for Trump Supporters, Liberals in Undercover Videos. I realized that I was a bit late in picking up an undercover video just released by my friend James O'Keefe of Project Veritas. You might recall that Project Veritas was the group whose undercover videos pretty much took out the Barack Obama love fest calling itself Acorn. Or, more recently, you might recall the secret video of a CNN anchor discussing, actually complaining about how her network buried her story about Hollywood leftists and their sexual abuse. Well, on Project Veritas's latest secret video, they lovingly detail the plans of Kyle Jurek, an Iowa field organizer, that's an employee, for Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders. In the video, Jurek details the plans of the hard left, the progressive activists, and what they have in mind. That in just a moment. Among the conclusions from the Hidden Tribes paper, you should consider the following. To a greater extent than any other group, the hard left, there I go again, I meant progressive activists, defines itself by its political ideology. In other words, to a greater extent than devoted conservatives, leftists consider their leftism to be central to their being, by 64 to 52% to be exact. Here's one that won't surprise you. To a greater extent than any other group, especially conservatives, leftists report, quote, feeling the most pressure from individuals of their own political ideology to conform to that ideology. Well, that demonstrates what you probably already knew. Leftists are herd animals who are quite willing to cull out any non-conforming members of the herd. Perhaps the most obvious example of that is the social media cancel culture, which recently ejected actor Vince Vaughn for having the audacity to shake hands with President Trump. Another conclusion that won't surprise you is that leftists are almost twice as likely as conservatives to protect, that's their word, protect people from dangerous and hateful speech by a factor of 74 to 43%. Well, here, by the way, it's unfortunate that the authors combined dangerous and hateful categories of speech into one, since they're very different things. I suspect that on hateful speech alone, the divide between left and right would be far greater. But more alarming, the hard left comprises fully 8% of our population. But before you say that's not many, I urge you to imagine that 1 of every 12 people you meet might be happy to see you in a gulag. And, says the paper, quote, they have an outsized role in political discourse even though they comprise a small portion of the total population. Here are some tidbits about the hard left, compared to average mainstream Americans. They are more than twice as likely to list politics as their hobby, 73 to 35%. 3 times more likely to say that people's outcomes are the result of luck and circumstance, 75 to 25%. More than twice as likely to say that they never pray, 50 to 19%. More than 3 times more likely to be ashamed to be an American, 69 to 24%. And more likely to say they are proud of their political ideology, 63 to 46%. Meaning they're proud to be ashamed to be an American, I guess. The paper also has some things to say about devoted conservatives, which comprise the counterpart to progressive activists. Many have to do with conservative beliefs, none of which will surprise you. I'll skip those. But how about this? Only 6% of the population identify as devoted conservatives, as opposed to 8% who are progressive activists. At first blush, that might not sound like much of a difference until you consider that it means of the people who politically get things done, the leftists outnumber us by 33%. Now, I won't dispute how the paper characterizes what different groups espouse and support or what issues divide us. What the paper does not do, however, is to theorize why. For example, the authors note that the hard left does not feel its core values and identity to be threatened, but by a factor of 5, traditional conservatives do. Why? I would offer that it is because the hard left is the undermining and destroying force in traditional values. But of course, that's my opinion. The study is silent. More importantly, why are we so divided? I would posit that the answer lies in the inaccuracy of the progressive activist portrayed in the study. They profile the typical leftist as Keen, a late middle-aged attorney living in Indiana close to his family. Nonsense. The real hard left activist is more likely portrayed by Kyle Jurek, the Iowa field organizer for Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders. Here are some of the beliefs this progressive activist and employee of a major presidential campaign freely espoused, and by and large, these are verbatim quotes. Quote, "The only thing fascists, that would be you, understand is violence. So the only way you can confront them is with violence. If Trump is elected, cities will burn. They, that would be Trump supporters, are effing scared senseless by anti-fascists. If Bernie doesn't get the nomination, or it goes to a second round at the Democratic National Convention, effing Milwaukee will burn." Jurek also wants the violence of the 1968 Democratic National Convention, but doesn't know it was 1968, saying repeatedly it was 1978, and he also got the candidates wrong, but after all, when have you ever encountered a leftist who would let a few facts stand in the way of his opinions? Here's another. The cops are the ones that are going to get effing beaten in Milwaukee. They're going to have to call up the National Guard for that expletive. Or, I don't give a F if it's free speech or not. You don't need, like, free speech has repercussions. Yeah, there are consequences to your speech. By the way, Jurek thinks your free speech is calling for the elimination of people based on race and gender, adding that you deserve a violent reaction. But if the hard left gets its way, the 26% of our population, who the paper describes as traditional liberals or passive liberals, are in for a rude surprise. It isn't just conservatives that Jurek and his ilk want to kill, and I quote, "Liberals get the wall first," end quote. Even the left-wing media isn't leftist enough for them. Jurek wants to walk into the even MSNBC studio and, quote, "drag those MFs by their hair and light them on fire in the streets." Yeah, in case you missed it, light them on fire in the streets. In perhaps the greatest lack of self-irony, this violent sociopath hired by the Bernie Sanders campaign says something we can all agree on. And I quote, "Bernie is a bad judge of character." You think? My name is Paul Ballone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. Please check out our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop, at HyattGuns.com. I also encourage you to check my website at GunsPoliticsAndFreedom.com, spell out the and, GunsPoliticsAndFreedom.com, where you can find both my writings and earlier editions of the show. See you next Sunday at 5.